Before we get started, make sure to subscribe to the channel and like this video. That way, you'll always stay connected to our stories and never miss the next adventure. The thing about living on Interstellar Research Station Olympus 9 was that everything worked perfectly. Too perfectly, if you ask Nolan, though nobody ever did. The air recyclers hummed at optimal efficiency. The gravity generators maintained a steady 1.02 standard units. The nutrient dispensers in the cafeteria produced beige paste with mathematical precision, calculated to provide exactly what each species needed to survive. Survive. Not live. Survive. Nolan had been eating that beige paste for 8 months, 3 weeks, and 4 days. Not that he was counting, except he absolutely was counting, because somewhere around month 6, he'd started having dreams about his grandmother's kitchen, about the smell of onions hitting hot oil, about the sound of butter melting in a pan. He'd wake up in his sterile quarters, realize where he was, and want to weep into his regulation pillow. The care package arrived on a routine supply shuttle, and Nolan nearly kissed the delivery drone. Inside the plasteel container, wrapped in enough vacuum-sealed layers to survive a meteor strike, were the ingredients for actual food. Real garlic, dehydrated onions, a precious bottle of cooking oil, salt. Actual salt, not the sodium supplement tablets the station dispensed, and spices. Oh, sweet mercy. Spices in little pouches that made him want to cry. He knew the rules. Food preparation in personal quarters was technically prohibited under station regulation something or other, subsection blah blah blah. The cafeteria existed for a reason. Unregulated cooking could trigger environmental alerts. It was inefficient. It was unnecessary. It was, according to the station manual, a waste of valuable resources and time. Nolan looked at the garlic in his hand, then at the manual on his datapad, then back at the garlic. "Yeah? Well," he said to his empty quarters, "efficiency can bite me." The portable heating unit he'd borrowed from the maintenance bay wasn't technically rated for food preparation. It was meant for welding small components. But heat was heat, and the small titanium pan he'd fabricated in the machine shop would work just fine. Probably. Possibly. He was going to find out. When the oil hit the heating element and started to shimmer, Nolan felt something in his chest unclench. When he dropped the garlic in and heard that sizzle, that perfect, beautiful sizzle, he actually laughed out loud. The smell hit him a moment later, sharp and pungent and so incredibly, wonderfully real that he had to steady himself against the counter. The station's environmental sensors, designed to detect any anomaly in air composition, immediately lost their collective minds. Somewhere in the command center, alarms were probably flashing. Somewhere, some poor monitoring officer was staring at readouts showing unprecedented organic compounds in Section 9, Residential Wing 3. Nolan didn't care. He was cooking rice, actual rice, with actual garlic and actual butter. And if they wanted to arrest him for it, they'd have to wait until he'd eaten every single bite. He didn't notice the 3 small faces pressed against the transparent panel of his door. He was too busy stirring, too focused on the way the rice was starting to turn golden at the edges, the way the butter was browning just right. He didn't hear the soft chirping sounds, the confused trills, the excited warbles. What he did hear was the door chime. Then it chimed again. Then someone started scratching at the panel. Nolan looked up and nearly dropped his spatula. 3 pairs of enormous eyes stared at him through the door. 3 small, furred faces, covered in patterns that reminded him of calico cats, if calico cats had been designed by someone who'd only heard cats described secondhand. Their ears, tall and expressive, were rotating like satellite dishes, trying to track the source of the smell. The chiral. The station had exactly 6 of them, and 3 were juveniles. Cubs, their species called them. Nolan had seen them around the station, usually trailing after their guardian, usually chattering in their musical language. He'd never seen them look like this, though. Desperate, fascinated, utterly hypnotized. He should have sent them away. He should have followed protocol. He should have done a lot of things. Instead, he opened the door. The 3 cubs practically fell into his quarters, their small bodies tumbling over each other in their eagerness. They were small by station standards, maybe waist-high to Nolan, covered in soft fur that shifted colors slightly, depending on the light. Their tails, long and expressive, were doing things that Nolan was pretty sure meant they were excited. "Ah," Nolan said, which was not his most articulate moment. "Hello." The smallest one, fur patterned in swirls of cream and brown, made a sound like a squeaky toy. The middle one, darker and sleeker, was literally vibrating. The largest, covered in patches of black and gold, was staring at the pan with an intensity that should have been illegal. "What?" the largest one said, in heavily accented but understandable common. "Is that smell?" That's cooking," Nolan said. "I'm making food." "Food," the smallest one repeated, like the word was holy. "Food smells like nothing we've ever smelled," the middle one finished, still vibrating. "What is it? What are you doing? Why does the air taste like colors?" Nolan blinked. "The air tastes like what now?" But the cubs weren't listening. They'd moved closer to the heating unit, noses working overtime, ears swiveling. The smallest one reached out a paw, and Nolan gently intercepted it before small fingers could meet hot metal. "Careful there," he said. "That's hot. You'll burn yourself." "But the smell," the cub insisted. "Please, what is it?" And here's where Nolan made his second mistake of the evening. His first had been cooking in the first place. His second was feeling sorry for 3 alien children who'd clearly never experienced anything more exciting than beige paste. "It's rice," he said, "with garlic and butter. It's probably not compatible with your biology, though. I don't know what chiral can safely eat." "We can eat anything," the largest cub said immediately. "We're very advanced, very evolved, very capable of eating mysterious human food that smells like the best thing in the universe." "That's probably not medically accurate," Nolan said, but he was already spooning a small portion into a bowl. Just a tiny amount. Just enough for them to taste. What could go wrong? The cubs had formed a semicircle around the bowl like it was a sacred artifact. They looked at it. They looked at each other. They looked at Nolan. "How do we—" the middle cub started. "You eat it," Nolan said. "With your mouths. Do chiral not chew their food?" "We drink nutrition supplement," the smallest said. "From dispensers. It tastes like nothing. Like empty." "Food isn't supposed to taste like empty," Nolan muttered. He picked up the bowl and held it where they could reach. "Here, try it. Just a little bit. If your stomach starts to hurt, stop immediately and tell your guardian, okay?" The largest cub reached in first, scooped up a small pawful of rice, and popped it into their mouth. For a moment, nothing happened. The cub chewed slowly, thoughtfully. Then their eyes went wide. Their ears shot straight up. Their tail went completely rigid. "Oh no," Nolan said. "Oh no. Are you okay? Is it bad? Should I call medical?" The cub made a sound. It started low, built into something that might have been a purr, and then exploded into what could only be described as a yowl of pure joy. The other 2 cubs jumped, startled, then immediately dove for the bowl. What followed was the most chaotic 3 minutes of Nolan's life. The cubs were making sounds he didn't know their species could make. They were fighting over individual grains of rice. They were talking over each other in rapid-fire chirral, too fast for the translator to keep up. The smallest one was doing what appeared to be a dance. The middle one had grabbed Nolan's hand and was shaking it violently, babbling something about flavor and colors in my mouth, and why has nobody told us about this? Okay, Nolan said, trying to maintain some control over the situation. Okay, I'm glad you like it, but you need to calm down before someone hears you and… The door chimed again. This time, it wasn't a polite chime. It was the kind of chime that meant someone had override codes and wasn't afraid to use them. The door slid open to reveal a tall, chiral adult, fur sleek and dark, eyes narrow with what Nolan recognized as parental fury. She took in the scene, the 3 cubs covered in rice and butter, the makeshift cooking setup, the human standing in the middle of it all looking guilty. "Milo," she said, her voice dangerously calm. "Knox. Whistle." "What, exactly, are you doing?" The smallest cub, apparently named Whistle, looked up with rice stuck to their face. "Lyra, the human has magic. He makes food that tastes like feelings. You have to try it." Lyra, who Nolan now recognized as the station's head of xenobiology, closed her eyes and took a long, slow breath. When she opened them, she fixed Nolan with a stare that could have cut through hull plating. "You," she said, "are in so much trouble." Nolan, still holding a spatula covered in garlic butter, could only nod. "Yeah," he said. "Yeah, I figured that out." The thing about Lyra was that she was terrifying in the way that truly competent people were terrifying. She didn't yell, she didn't threaten, she simply stood in Nolan's doorway, radiating disapproval so intense it had its own gravitational field, while the 3 cubs tried to explain the concept of flavor to someone who'd apparently never experienced it either. "It's like eating sunshine," Milo was saying, paws gesturing wildly. "But sunshine that's warm and tastes like happiness, and also a little bit like the color yellow, but in your mouth." "That makes no sense," Lyra said. "Nothing makes sense anymore," Knox added, still vibrating. "The human broke reality with his cooking magic, and now we know that everything we've eaten our whole lives is a lie." "We've been living in food darkness," Whistle said solemnly, "and the human brought us into the light." Lyra pinched the bridge of her nose, a gesture that Nolan was pleased to see worked across species. "You fed my cubs unregulated foodstuffs. Do you have any idea how many protocols you've violated? Do you understand that I'm legally required to report this to medical, to administration, to possibly 3 different oversight committees?" "Yeah," Nolan said, because there wasn't much else to say. "Sorry, they looked so interested, and I thought—" "You thought you'd feed alien children mysterious human food without checking for biological compatibility, toxicity profiles, or allergenic responses? When you put it that way, it sounds way worse than it felt at the time." "Because it is worse!" Lyra's tail was lashing now, a sign Nolan recognized as agitation. They could have had an adverse reaction. They could have gotten sick. They could have… She stopped, nostrils flaring. "What is that smell?" "That's the garlic butter rice," Nolan said. "There's still some in the pan if you want to." "I absolutely do not want to," Lyra said quickly. Too quickly. Her eyes had drifted to the pan despite herself. "I'm here in a professional capacity, as a xenobiologist, and as the legal guardian of 3 cubs who are now convinced that nutrition paste is a form of child abuse." "It kind of is, though," Milo muttered. Not helping, Lyra said. She turned back to Nolan. I need to run medical scans, all 3 of them, and I need a full breakdown of every ingredient you used. If there's any sign of toxicity, any sign at all, I'm shutting this down, and you're looking at formal charges. Understood, Nolan said. He started listing ingredients while Lyra pulled out a medical scanner, running it over each cub in turn. They submitted to the examination with unusual patience, probably because they were still eating rice directly from the bowl with their paws. 5 minutes later, Lyra was staring at her scanner like it had personally betrayed her. This can't be right, she murmured. What? Are they okay? They're fine. Better than fine. Their dopamine levels are elevated. Serotonin is up. There's increased activity in neural pathways associated with pleasure and reward, and… She looked up at Nolan, confused, and maybe a little bit angry about being confused. Their digestive systems are processing the food perfectly, like their biology was designed for it, but that's impossible. Cural have been on optimized nutrition for 8 generations. Maybe their biology remembers what yours forgot, Nolan said quietly. Lyra's ears flattened against her head. That's not how evolution works. No? Then why are they doing so well? Why do they look happier than you've probably ever seen them? Because it's new. Because it's novel. Because… Lyra stopped, scanning the cubs again. Whistle had curled up in a corner, purring, belly full. Knox was licking the bowl clean with single-minded determination. Milo was staring at Nolan like he'd invented fire. This is a problem, she said finally. Why? Because they're never going to accept nutrition paste again. Because I've seen that look before, in historical texts. That's food bonding. That's the kind of response our species used to have before we optimized it away. She sat down heavily on Nolan's bunk. Do you have any idea what you've done? Made 3 kids happy? Started a revolution, Lyra said. She looked at the scanner again, then at the cubs, then at the pan. I should report this. I should confiscate your cooking equipment and file an incident report, and… Her stomach made a sound. A very undignified, very interested sound. The cubs perked up immediately. Lyra's hungry, Milo announced. Lyra should try the human's magic. I absolutely should not. Just 1 bite, Whistle said. For science. You're a scientist. This is science. That's not how science works. Then how does science work? Knox asked innocently. Because our biology says we should like this food. You scanned us. You saw the results. Doesn't science say you should test it yourself? To verify the data? Lyra looked at the 3 cubs, who had clearly learned to weaponize logic from her. She looked at Nolan. She looked at the pan. 1 bite, she said. Purely for research purposes. Nolan spooned a small portion into a clean bowl. He handed it to her. She held it like it might explode. It's just rice, Nolan said. Garlic, butter, salt, nothing exotic. Lyra took the smallest possible bite, chewed, swallowed, sat very still for a long moment. Well? Milo asked. I need, Lyra said carefully, to be alone with this bowl for a moment, for scientific observation. The cubs will come with me. We will speak of this later, human. She stood, bowl clutched in her paws, and herded the 3 cubs toward the door. They went reluctantly, looking back at Nolan like he was a prophet they were being forced to leave behind. Can we come back? Whistle asked. Absolutely not, Lyra said. Can the human come to our quarters? No. Can we learn to make the magic ourselves? We'll discuss it later. Move. She paused in the doorway, looked at Nolan. Don't cook anything else. Don't feed anyone else. Don't do anything until I've figured out what to do about this situation." "Got it," Nolan said. She left. The door closed. Nolan stood in his quarters, surrounded by the evidence of his culinary crime, and laughed. He couldn't help it. The sheer absurdity of the situation, the look on Lyra's face when she'd tasted actual food, the cubs declaring themselves victims of nutritional oppression. His communicator buzzed. Message from an unknown sender. He opened it. "The cubs won't stop talking about your food. I've had to explain the concept of flavor 6 times. 6! I need you to teach me everything you did, for research purposes. Also, do you have more butter? Purely for analysis. This is Lyra. Obviously. Meet me in Lab 3 tomorrow at 0800, tell no one. Bring ingredients." Nolan grinned. "Revolution," she'd said. Well, if the revolution ran on garlic butter, he was happy to be a founding member. His communicator buzzed again. Different sender. He didn't recognize this one either. "Human. Word has reached me that you possess knowledge of flavor enhancement. I am Onmar, engineering section. My species has also optimized away cuisine. I may have been listening to environmental sensors when your cooking triggered alerts. I may have traced the compounds. I may be very interested in learning more. The cubs have been broadcasting their experience to anyone who will listen. You've created a situation. I wish to be part of this situation. Will trade engineering skills for food education." Then another message. And another. By the time Nolan's communicator stopped buzzing, he had 8 requests from various crew members, all asking variations of the same thing. Teach us. Show us. Help us remember what we've lost. Nolan looked at his small cooking setup, his limited ingredients, his tiny quarters. He thought about station regulations, about oversight committees, about the official trouble he was probably already in. Then he thought about the look on those cubs' faces, about Lyra trying to pretend she wasn't affected while clutching that bowl like treasure, about an entire station full of beings who'd forgotten that food could be more than fuel. "Well," he said to his empty quarters, "this is either going to be amazing or I'm getting fired. Possibly both." He started making a list of ingredients he'd need. If he was going to accidentally start a culinary revolution, he might as well do it properly. The Underground Supper Club, as Nolan had started calling it in his head, began in Maintenance Bay 5. It was Onmar's idea, actually. The crystalline engineer had shown up at Nolan's quarters at precisely Oro 300 station time, when the corridors were empty and the monitoring systems were running on minimal staffing. "I have acquired a space," Onmar had said, his voice resonating through his mineral-based body like sound through a cave. "I have also acquired ingredients through creative requisition methods that are best not discussed in detail. I believe the human phrase is, 'Don't ask, don't tell.'" "You stole food?" Nolan asked. "I creatively redistributed resources that were being wasted in long-term storage. There is a difference, legally speaking." "Possibly." Onmar's crystalline face couldn't smile, but his body refracted light in a way that suggested pleasure. "I also brought heating elements rated for actual cooking, not welding. I learned from observation." The maintenance bay was perfect, spacious, off the main corridors, with excellent ventilation that Onmar had personally modified to filter cooking smells before they reached the main environmental sensors. There were work tables that could serve as prep stations, industrial-grade power sources, and enough space for maybe a dozen beings to gather comfortably. "This is either genius or incredibly stupid," Nolan said, surveying the setup. "These concepts are not mutually exclusive," Onmar replied. "Now, shall we begin? I wish to understand the relationship between heat and flavor transformation. That first session was just the two of them. Nolan teaching, Anmar absorbing information like a geological formation absorbing minerals. The crystalline engineer turned out to have perfect temperature control, his body able to regulate heat with precision that made him an ideal sous chef. He also had no taste buds, which he admitted was disappointing, but didn't diminish his fascination with the chemistry of cooking. The proteins denature at specific temperatures, Anmar observed, watching Nolan sear vegetables. The sugars caramelize. The Maillard reaction produces hundreds of flavor compounds. This is engineering at a molecular level. This is beautiful. "This is dinner," Nolan said, but he was grinning. By the second session, Lyra had shown up with the 3 cubs. She'd tried to maintain her professional disapproval, but she'd also brought a data pad full of notes about chiral nutritional biology and a list of Earth spices that should be safe for her species. "I'm here as a scientific observer," she announced, "to ensure proper safety protocols. That's all." "Sure," Nolan said, "and I'm here because I enjoy violating station regulations for fun." "You're here because you have a pathological need to feed people," Lyra corrected. "I've been researching human psychology. It's a documented trait. Food as love language. Food as social bonding. You literally cannot help yourself." "That feels like an attack." "It's an observation. Now, the cubs have questions about seasoning ratios for educational purposes." The cubs had many questions. They had stationed themselves around Nolan's work area like attentive students, ears forward, tails still. Milo wanted to understand why salt made things taste more like themselves. Knox was fascinated by the concept of complementary flavors. Whistle just wanted to stir things and occasionally sneak tastes when they thought no one was watching. "The salt doesn't add saltiness at the right concentration," Nolan explained, demonstrating with a simple tomato sauce. "It enhances the existing flavors. It makes the tomato taste more tomato." "But how?" Milo asked. "How does adding one thing make another thing more itself? That's philosophy. That's deep cosmic truth in food form." "That's chemistry," Anmar said. "The sodium ions interact with taste receptors and other flavor compounds to enhance perception. Though I admit, the philosophy interpretation has merit." By the third session, word had spread beyond Nolan's control. 6 more crew members showed up, species he didn't even recognize. A methane-breathing life form in an environmental suit who wanted to understand cooking despite being unable to eat the results. A silicon-based engineer who claimed to appreciate the thermal dynamics. 2 members of the Chiral delegation who'd apparently heard about the Cubs' experience and wanted to investigate. And then Praxis showed up. The station administrator stood in the doorway of Maintenance Bay 5, taking in the scene with an expression that Nolan couldn't quite read. The cooking setup, the mixed species gathering, the cubs teaching a tall, mantis-like alien how to chop vegetables with their inappropriate number of limbs. "So," Praxis said, his voice carrying across the bay, "this is where productivity has been going." Everyone froze. Milo dropped a spoon. Whistle tried to hide behind Lyra. Anmar's crystalline body made a sound like grinding rocks. Nolan straightened up, spatula still in hand. "Look, I can explain. You've been running an unauthorized food preparation operation in station facilities," Praxis continued. "You've been using resources without proper allocation. You've been gathering crew members during off-duty hours for activities not listed in any official schedule." He stepped into the bay, the door closing behind him. "Do you have any idea how many regulations you're violating?" "Several," Nolan offered. 38. I counted. I also counted the productivity reports from every crew member who's attended your little gatherings." Praxis pulled out a data pad. "Morale is up 18%. Interdepartmental cooperation has increased. Problem-solving efficiency has improved. 3 different teams have reported breakthrough solutions to problems they'd been stuck on for months. He looked up. Care to explain that? People work better when they're happy? Nolan tried. People work better when they're fed properly, Lyra interjected. She'd stepped forward, data pad in hand. I've been documenting neurological responses. The act of preparing and sharing food triggers social bonding mechanisms that optimized nutrition completely bypasses. We've literally engineered the joy out of eating, and it's had cascading effects on our psychological well-being. That's a concerning assessment, Praxis said. It's a factual assessment. Look at the data. Lyra transferred files to his pad. The cubs aren't just happier. They're healthier. Their immune responses have improved. Their cognitive function is enhanced. And it's not just them. Every species represented here is showing similar improvements. Praxis studied the data in silence. The entire bay held its breath. Nolan gripped his spatula like a weapon, which was ridiculous, but somehow felt appropriate. I should shut this down, Praxis said finally. I should file reports. I should enforce regulations that exist for legitimate safety reasons. But, Nolan prompted, but I've also been eating nutrition paste for 6 years, and I'm very tired, and something smells incredible, and I'm not above admitting when efficiency might have gone too far. Praxis looked at Nolan. What are you making? Roasted vegetables with herb oil, Nolan said cautiously. It's compatible with most metabolisms here, including yours according to Lyra's biological database. I'll try it, 1 portion, as an administrative evaluation of this operation's merit. Nolan plated a serving. Praxis took it, sat down on a work stool, and took a careful bite. He chewed slowly, swallowed, sat in silence. Administrator? Lyra prompted. I'm having feelings about food, Praxis said. This is unprecedented. I need a moment to process. He took another bite. This is a problem. Why is it a problem? Anmar asked. Because I now understand what we've lost. Because I can't unknow this. Because... Praxis stopped, taking another bite. Because the Chiral aren't the only ones. My species did the same thing. 6 other major civilizations represented in this sector did the same thing. We all optimized away our cuisines in the name of efficiency, and we all lost something fundamental in the process. So what do we do? Nolan asked. Praxis finished his plate, set it down carefully. I have a proposal. A challenge, if you will. In 3 days, I'm hosting a senior staff dinner. Required attendance for all department heads and several visiting dignitaries. You will prepare the meal. That's a lot of pressure for vegetables and rice, Nolan said. If you succeed, if there are no adverse reactions, if you can demonstrate that this approach to food has genuine value beyond simple pleasure, I'll authorize a formal revision to station food protocols. You'll get official support, proper facilities, actual resources. And if I fail? Then this operation shuts down permanently, and we all go back to beige paste and pretend this never happened. Praxis stood. But I don't think you'll fail. I think you're going to change everything. No pressure. He left. The bay erupted in excited chatter. Lyra was already making lists. Anmar was calculating thermal requirements. The cubs were bouncing around like they'd been given sugar, which was ironic since Nolan hadn't actually introduced them to sugar yet. Nolan looked at his makeshift kitchen, his mismatched crew of amateur cooks, the challenge that had just been laid before him. Well, he said, I guess we're cooking for dignitaries now. Anyone know how to make fancy food? Define fancy, Anmar said. I have no idea. I'm a maintenance engineer, not a chef. Too late for that distinction, Lyra said, smiling for the first time since they'd met. You're whatever you need to be. Now let's get to work. The next 2 days were controlled chaos, with emphasis on the chaos. Nolan had cooked for friends, for family, for the occasional potluck back on Earth. He had never cooked for diplomatic dignitaries representing multiple galactic civilizations, each with different metabolic requirements, cultural expectations, and the potential to shut down his entire operation if something went wrong. No pressure, Praxis had said. Nolan was going to have words with that administrator later, assuming he survived this. The ritual representatives cannot process capsicum, Lyra announced, reading from her biological database. The Ixan delegation requires higher protein concentrations. The Chiral visiting officials haven't eaten anything but paste in decades and will probably have heightened sensitivity to strong flavors. Oh, and Administrator Praxis's species has a mild allergy to certain aromatic compounds found in earth herbs. So basically, I need to make multiple dishes that are exciting, but not too exciting, flavorful, but not overwhelming, safe for everyone, but still interesting enough to prove that real food matters. Nolan dropped his head onto the prep table. I'm doomed. You're dramatic, Anmar corrected, his crystalline hands already prepping vegetables with geometric precision. You have skills. You have assistants. You have 3 small furry beings who have appointed themselves quality control. We're very official, Milo announced from their position on a stool, wearing what appeared to be a makeshift chef's hat constructed from folded station linens. We have hats and everything. The hats don't make you official, Lyra said. The hats make us look official, which is almost the same thing, Knox countered, adjusting their own linen creation. Whistle, who was supposed to be washing vegetables, was instead building a small fort out of root vegetables and humming what might have been the station's safety jingle. Nolan decided to pick his battles, and proper vegetable. Architecture wasn't worth fighting about right now. The menu had taken 8 hours to plan. Nolan had gone through his limited ingredient list 12 times, cross-referenced with Lyra's biological data, consulted with Anmar about thermal dynamics, and eventually landed on something that was either brilliant or insane. Again, possibly both. First course, a delicate broth infused with gentle aromatics, designed to be universally safe and to prime digestive systems unused to real flavor. Second course, roasted vegetables with 3 different seasoning profiles, allowing guests to choose their preferred intensity. Main course, a grain dish with proteins that Lyra had certified as compatible across species, accompanied by sauces ranging from mild to adventurous. Dessert, something sweet, but not aggressive, because apparently half the galaxy had forgotten what sweetness tasted like. This is ambitious, Lyra said, reviewing the menu. This is possibly too ambitious. It's absolutely too ambitious, Nolan agreed, but we're doing it anyway, because I've apparently lost touch with reality. You lost touch with reality when you started cooking on a space station where it's technically illegal, Lyra pointed out. This is just the logical extension of that decision. The day of the dinner arrived with the kind of inevitability usually reserved for deadlines and dental appointments. The meal was scheduled for 1900 station time in Conference Room 1, which had been hastily converted into a dining space. Anmar had installed proper heating elements. Lyra had verified air filtration. The Cubs had appointed themselves servers, despite Nolan's protests. We know the food, Milo insisted. We understand it. We can explain it to the confused old beings who forgot how to eat properly. Please don't call the dignitaries confused old beings to their faces, Nolan pleaded. We'll call them honored confused old beings, Knox offered. That's not better. It's slightly better, Whistle said. It has honored in it. The guests arrived at 1850 because apparently dignitaries across all species shared the trait of arriving early to evaluate situations. Nolan watched through the kitchen partition as they filed in. Praxis, looking nervous. Two tall Chiral officials with sleek fur and skeptical expressions. Three ritual representatives whose translucent bodies shimmered in the light. A pair of Ixan delegates covered in geometric scale patterns, and several others he didn't recognize. They look terrifying, Nolan muttered. They're just people who forgot how to enjoy eating, Lyra said. You're about to remind them. No pressure. Everyone keeps saying that, and it keeps not helping. The first course went out. Simple broth, carefully strained, aromatic but gentle. Nolan watched through the partition as the guests regarded their bowls with suspicion. One of the Chiral officials sniffed it cautiously. A ritual representative held their bowl up to the light as if checking for contaminants. Then they tasted it. The reaction wasn't explosive like the Cubs had been. It was quieter, more subtle. A pause, a second sip, a thoughtful expression. One of the Ixan delegates closed their eyes. The Chiral official's ears twitched forward, a sign of interest. They're not dying, Anmar observed. This is promising. The bar for success is so low right now, Nolan said. Second course. The vegetables went out on platters, the three seasoning options clearly marked. Nolan had coached the Cubs on explaining the differences. Mild for cautious palates, medium for the adventurous, intense for those ready to dive back into flavor. He watched Milo approach one of the Chiral officials, hat slightly askew, and gestured to the options with surprising professionalism. The official selected mild, tasted it, paused, reached for the medium option, tasted that. Their ears went flat against their head, then slowly rose to full attention. They said something in rapid Chiral that the translator rendered as, I remember this. How do I remember this? My grandmother used to make something that felt like this. Nolan felt something tight in his chest loosen slightly. Main course was where things got complicated. Multiple components, multiple plates, the careful orchestration of getting everything to temperature simultaneously. Anmar was handling thermal regulation with crystalline precision. Lyra was plating with the focus of someone performing surgery. The Cubs were running dishes back and forth, somehow managing not to drop anything despite their excitement. Nolan was pretty sure he was sweating through his regulation uniform, but there was no time to worry about that. Plates went out. He held his breath. Through the partition, he saw the guests examining their meals, saw the conversation pause, saw them begin to eat, and then, slowly, the energy in the room changed. People leaned forward. They started talking, not in formal diplomatic tones, but in actual conversation. One of the ritual delegates was gesturing animatedly. The Ixan representatives had moved their chairs closer together to share dishes. The Chiral officials were eating with an intensity that suggested they'd forgotten food could command that kind of attention. It's working, Lyra whispered. Look at them. They're not just eating. They're connecting. Praxis stood up. Nolan's heart dropped. This was it. The moment where the administrator announced this was all inappropriate and needed to stop, and I need to speak with the chef, Praxis said. Immediately. Nolan stepped out of the kitchen, wiping his hands on a towel, preparing for the worst. The entire room turned to look at him. Multiple species, multiple cultures, all focused on the human in maintenance coveralls who'd accidentally started a food revolution. This meal, Praxis said slowly, has created a diplomatic incident. Oh no, Nolan said. Oh yes, because 3 different delegations have simultaneously demanded that their homeworlds reconsider optimized nutrition policies. Because the Chiral officials are crying, actually crying, about ancestral food memories they didn't know they had. Because one of the ritual representatives just proposed a cultural exchange program focused on cuisine revival. Praxis paused. And because I haven't felt this satisfied after a meal in 6 years, and I'm angry about that. Angry that we've been living like this. Angry that it took a human making illegal rice in his quarters to show us what we'd lost. The room was silent. Nolan had no idea what to say. Fortunately, Milo had no such hesitation. Does this mean the human isn't in trouble? The cub asked hopefully. The human is in terrible trouble, Praxis said. The human is in so much trouble that I'm creating an entirely new position just to properly categorize it. Chief of Culinary Operations, responsible for overseeing the station's transition to proper food preparation, cross-species menu development, and training programs. He looked at Nolan. Congratulations on your promotion. Your maintenance duties are hereby reassigned. Wait, what? Nolan managed. You're being officially recognized for accidentally improving station morale, health metrics, and interspecies cooperation through the medium of garlic butter, Praxis said. Accept the promotion before I realize how absurd this sounds, and change my mind. I accept, Nolan said quickly. One of the Chiral officials stood. I'm all, they said, their voice thick with emotion. I'm a cultural historian. I've spent my life studying what my people lost when we optimized. I've read about flavor, about cuisine, about food as cultural identity. I've never experienced it. They gestured to their empty plate. Until tonight. And we need, to preserve this, to learn from this, to maybe, possibly, help other species remember what they've forgotten. I can teach you, Nolan said. I mean, I'm not a professional chef, but I can show you what I know. That's more than any of us have, all said. That's everything. Dessert went out after that, though the mood had shifted from formal dinner to something more like a gathering. The sweet dish, carefully calibrated to introduce the concept without overwhelming, was met with sounds of pleasure that crossed species barriers. Whistle had abandoned all pretense of professional service and was explaining the concept of caramelization to anyone who would listen. Knox was demonstrating proper tasting technique. Milo had somehow ended up in a deep discussion with an Ixon delegate about the cultural significance of shared meals. Lyra appeared at Nolan's elbow. You did it, she said quietly. You actually did it. We did it, Nolan corrected. You, me, Anmar, 3 small chaos agents in hats. Team effort. Team effort that's apparently sparking a multi-species culinary renaissance, Lyra said. No pressure for your next meal. I hate that phrase so much now. Get used to it. You're officially the most important cook in this sector of space. She paused. For what it's worth, I'm glad you violated station regulations. I'm glad the Cubs found you. I'm glad you reminded us that efficiency isn't everything. Yeah, well, I'm glad you didn't report me immediately. I tried to, but then I tasted the food. Lyra smiled. Hard to report someone for giving you back something you didn't know you'd lost. The dinner wound down eventually, though several guests lingered, reluctant to return to their quarters, and the memory of beige paste. All had cornered Nolan with a data pad full of questions. Praxis was making notes about facility requirements. The Cubs were exhausted but triumphant, curled together in a corner, still wearing their chef hats. So, Anmar said, his crystalline form refracting the kitchen lights. What do we cook next? Nolan looked around the converted conference room, at the multiple species discovering joy in food, at the mess they'd made, and the connections they'd built. He thought about his grandmother's kitchen, about the care packages from Earth, about how something as simple as garlic and butter had managed to change everything. "Whatever we want," he said. "We cook whatever we want. And we teach anyone who's interested. And maybe, possibly, we help the galaxy remember that some inefficiencies are worth keeping." "Poetic," Anmar said. "Also impractical from a resource allocation standpoint. Good thing I'm not in resource allocation anymore." 3 weeks later, Station Olympus 9's cafeteria underwent complete renovation. The nutrition paste dispensers were relegated to emergency backup status. Cooking classes were scheduled across 3 shifts to accommodate different species and schedules. Nolan found himself teaching everyone from junior engineers to visiting diplomats the basics of seasoning, timing, and heat control. The Cubs, now official apprentices with actual uniforms instead of improvised hats, had become minor celebrities. They'd started a video series explaining cooking concepts to other young Chiral across the communication networks. Their enthusiasm was infectious, their descriptions of flavor hilariously overwrought, and their genuine joy in food preparation had sparked interest across multiple homeworlds. Lyra had published 3 papers on the neurological and social benefits of traditional food preparation. Anmar had designed cooking equipment specifically adapted for different species' needs. Praxis had stopped looking stressed and started looking smug about the station's improved metrics. And Nolan, former maintenance engineer turned accidental revolutionary, taught cooking classes in the morning, developed new recipes in the afternoon, and occasionally made simple garlic butter rice just because he could. Just because it was good. Just because efficiency wasn't everything. And sometimes the best thing you could do for someone was feed them something that tasted like home. The galaxy was slowly remembering how to eat. And it had started with 3 curious cubs, one human who missed his grandmother's cooking, and the realization that some rules were worth breaking for the right reasons. In the revised Station Olympus 9 cafeteria, late at night when the crowds had gone, you could sometimes find Nolan and his unlikely crew of co-conspirators, cooking for the joy of it, teaching whoever wandered in, proving that the most revolutionary act was sometimes just making sure people were properly fed. The Cubs had declared themselves taste testers. The galaxy had declared itself interested in learning. And Nolan had declared that garlic butter made everything better, which was a universal truth that transcended species boundaries. Some revolutions, it turned out, smelled delicious.